Okay, this is the 6th Wisconsin at Gettysburg. A line on the colors, close up on the colors, part 2 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. We're standing here in a low area between Herbst Woods and the Lutheran Theological Seminary. And in this area, an aide, Lieutenant Martin, galloped in his horse up to Dawes and said, "Colonel, General Doubleday is now in command of the 1st Corps, and he directs you to halt your regiment." Now, what he was referring to was General Abner Doubleday, who was commander of the 3rd Division of 1st Corps. This is the same man who has mythically been credited with inventing the game of baseball. Now, Dawes replied, ordering the men of the 6th to lie down facing the woods. And they laid down here in this position that I am standing at now. Now, unknown to Dawes and the men of the 6th, General Reynolds had been shot in the head and killed instantly while deploying the rest of the Iron Brigade into the woods. Now, there's been a lot of conjecture about where Reynolds was when he received his fatal shot, and that was something that I covered extensively in my Forward for God's Sake Forward video series. But there's been a lot of conflicting reports from the men of the Iron Brigade about when they themselves learned about the fate of John Reynolds. Now, Private James P. Sullivan, known as Mickey to his comrades in the regiment, claimed later in a memoir that a very boyish staff officer galloped up to our commanding officer, who was Dawes, and I heard him say, "General Reynolds is killed, and General Doubleday is in command and directs your regiment." Now, Mickey's story is unlikely, as Dawes, being the commander that Mickey was referring to, did not find out about the death of Reynolds until later on in the day. Others in the 6th Wisconsin claim that they figured it out on their own, as they either recognized the officers approaching Dawes as being aides to General Abner Doubleday, or through not recognizing the aides, figured out that something terrible had happened to John F. Reynolds and that somebody else was leading the 1st Corps. Now, as the 6th lay here in reserve in this field, the commander of the brigade guard, being the order of march with the 6th, reported Dawes for duty in the impending battle. The brigade guard consisted of 2 officers and 100 men, which Dawes split into 2 50-man companies, placing one on the left flank of the regiment and one on the right flank of the regiment. This raised the total strength of the regiment to 340 able-bodied soldiers and officers, just over 1/3 of the strength that they'd left Madison, Wisconsin with 2 years prior. Now, the regiment had been depleted through combat actions at Brawner's Farm, 2nd Bull Run, South Mountain, Antietam, and Chancellorsville, not to mention the effects on them from disease, which was the most common reason for a regiment to lose its strength during the American Civil War. At this point, the 6th Wisconsin was the only regiment of Wadsworth's division, that is, 11 regiments in 2 brigades, that was not yet engaged on the battlefield, the rest of them being engaged directly in front of us near Herbst Woods. The rest of the Iron Brigade, made up of the Wisconsin regiments, the Indiana Regiment, and the aforementioned 24th Michigan, were under the command of General Meredith and were involved in a hot firefight in the woods with the brigade of General James J. Archer's Alabamans and Tennesseans. General Lysander Cutler's brigade, composed of New Yorkers, Hoosiers, and Pennsylvanians, were on the far right of the Union line, mostly on the other side of the Chambersburg Pike, which you see there directly in front of us. And they were engaged with regiments of General Joseph Davis, brigade of Mississippians and Tar Heels. Now, Davis was related to President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. It wasn't long before the Confederates under Davis were getting an upper hand on the Union boys north of the Chambersburg Pike, and soon the men of Cutler's brigade began to give way, retreating in order toward the east. Now, Lieutenant Meredith Jones, who was an aide to General Doubleday, came up to Dawes in great haste right here in this area. And he said, "Colonel, General Doubleday directs you to move your regiment at once to the right," as the rebels were driving Cutler's men hard back toward the town. Now, Cutler, incidentally, had been the original colonel of the 6th Wisconsin, serving in that capacity until he was wounded in the thigh at the Battle of Brawner's Farm in August of 1862. Later, he'd been promoted to brigadier general and placed in command of the 2nd Brigade of the 1st Division of the 1st Corps, which he led here today on the battlefield. The men of the 6th still held their old commander in high regard and would continue to do so for the rest of their lives. Dawes now ordered the 6th to get to their feet and file right march. And the regiment moved at the double quick northward in columns of 4 toward the Chambersburg Pike. Some of the men Dawes included later claimed at this point they saw the body of General John F. Reynolds being carried to the rear in a blanket. Dawes said he was not aware that General Reynolds had been killed, however. This has been the 6th Wisconsin at Gettysburg, a line on the colors, close up on the colors, part 2 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook.